But I emailed you some time ago, and I said I was thinking maybe we could talk about, since you're a theologian, we could talk about Trump from a religious or spiritual perspective, Trump and Trumpism. And what do you think? Can we?
Yeah, I think it can be done, and more importantly, it ought to be done. But your question led me to ponder the meaning of your question. Ironically,
it's a job somebody's got to do. I had not done that before sending it.
Well, I thought to myself, now what would it mean to think about Trump or anything political from a distinctively religious or spiritual point of view, as opposed to, say, a moral one? So, you could just turn on virtually any form of social media or traditional media and find all manner of moral analyses of Trump's discourse. And I thought to myself, well, what would a religious discourse or a spiritual discourse add to that? Would it just, for example, add an exclamation mark to otherwise moral convictions? So
you could just say, and God agrees with me, after your moral invective.
That's correct. So we could say xenophobia is bad and immoral, and then presumably the religious person would only say that God also thinks that xenophobia is bad and immoral. In which case it poses an interesting question. Does that sort of added exclamation mark matter? And is that all religious reflection adds to it? And if so, does it merely just add a certain kind of dogmatism to convictions we could have gotten to by other means? So all those seem to me to be questions provoked by your invitation to me this afternoon.
Well, let me ask a related question. If the analysis is spiritual or religious, if the analysis is religious, does that mean it does have a moral component?
Yeah, I think it does, but I think it situates that moral component within some broader scheme or vision. So I was pondering, in light of this coming conversation, two statements that I could make. One, for example, that racism is morally odious. And then I thought about what Heschel said in his famous speech on race. He said, well, racism is Satanism. Again, I thought to myself, now that's an exclamation mark for sure, but is there something more? And I think there is something more.
Now, his speech may not be as famous to everyone as it is to you, by the way, but this is Joshua Heschel, a rabbi who wrote a famous book about biblical prophets, for one thing, right?
Yes, he's known for his work on prophecy and, of course, his work on other openness to other religions, but he was also, along with MLK, quite involved in civil rights and most forthrightly spoke about racism as a form of blasphemy, as Satanism, in part because he argued that to demean another in racist ways was to challenge the image of God in every human being. So if God has created human beings in the image of God, then racism is not merely a moral wrong. It's a theological vice. And that extra step, it seems to me, is a matter of situating our moral convictions within some reading of the way things are or ought to be, or how things ought to be because of the way things are. And that larger encompassing framework or vision, I think, is what a religious, spiritual, or theological lens affords us.
Okay, so let's back up and go over that again. So when he first said racism is Satanism, I thought, well, that sounds like what you just said, which is just a moral assertion with an exclamation point, right? And in fact, I just the other day, like yesterday, watched a video that was floating around social media of Alex Jones, this famous conspiracy theorist who has a somewhat symbiotic relationship with Trump. And he was going on and on. He has a huge following. His site is InfoWars or something. He was going on and on about how Hillary is literally demonic. And Obama, he says, I know from people in the Secret Service, they have said that they smell like sulfur. I mean, he was going, so anyway, that he was calling them satanic, and that was a way of saying that his moral judgment against them had had the backing of God in a way. But you're saying that this is just the beginning for Heschel, that he has a whole theological articulation having to do with, now it's that to be a racist is to not honor the divine in human beings?
Yes, indeed. So if, fundamental affirmation of biblical theology is that the human being is created in the image of God, to do violence to that image is to blaspheme, is to ignore that of the Creator in the created. And that kind of claim situates our moral discourse within a larger worldview, a larger set of sensibilities and orientation. So I think in that sense, there is added something more than the exclamation mark.
Okay.
Although certainly I do think the exclamation mark is
in order.
Yes, and unmistakable. It's surely there. So
yeah, of course. I mean, the Trump defenders would contest the claim that he's racist or that things he said are explicitly racist and so on. There's that.
Yes, but I think it would strain credulity to make that argument, since he dismisses entire groups of people, Mexicans fundamentally as rapists.
He said some of them are good. He said, and I assume some of them are good people. I assume.
Yes.
He didn't state it as a fact. He could not say with complete confidence that one of the millions of Mexicans in the United States is a good person, but he assumed that at least one was.
Right, and then we know by now all the standard dog whistles about law and order. Yeah. His promise to sort of establish, and of course these signals are not being missed by white nationalists and others who recognize him as one of their own. So he knows what he's doing, and he's retweeting anti-Semitic sites, white racist, white power groups. So yes, it's kind of hard to argue that this isn't a discourse awash in racism. So I think for a theologian, for a person who, like Heschel, believes that human beings are created in the image of God, Trumpism is not morally invidious. It is that, surely, but it is also theologically problematic.